Time now for the week that was, where we take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe. We begin on a breaking news note. Republican Kevin McCarthy was elected Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives early this morning after making extensive concessions to a group of right-wing hardliners that raised questions about the party's ability to govern. The 57-year-old Californian suffered one final humiliation when Representative Matt Gaetz withheld his vote on the 14th ballot as midnight approached, prompting a scuffle in which fellow Republican Mike Rogers had to be physically pulled away. McCarthy's victory in the 15th ballot brought an end to the deepest congressional dysfunction in over 160 years, but it sharply illustrated the difficulties that he will face in leading a narrow and deeply polarized majority. He won at last on a margin of 216 to 212. He was able to be elected with the votes of fewer than half of the House members, only because 6 in his own party withheld their vote, not backing McCarthy as leader, but also not voting for another contender. Interesting one, isn't it?
You can say
Finally,
that again.
I mean, that's a record, isn't it?
It is a record, and I was just watching a little bit of what happened there, and for 15 ballots, 160 years, that's a lot. Just one of the key demands of the Republican holdouts, those 20, the renegades or the rebels, as you might call us, was the ability for just one legislator to trigger a vote on whether to remove the Speaker from office. That the motion to vacate could invoke another round of voting in the House, meaning anytime he switch, he puts to the gavel, there might be issues if it's not, in agreement with the generality of the other Republicans as well. So he might be thinking about that every time he has to put that gavel down, that he shouldn't make any mistakes. So to a large extent, I think, it took a lot of cajoling, arm twisting, and I'm even surprised
and even almost physical,
Yes. In the person of Matt Gaetz, one would have would have thought he will support a hardliner, just like McCarthy himself, who is an unalloyed former President Trump supporter in every way, even when it's obvious that things are not going right and negative things abound. But we'll wait and see. It's unfortunate. He is Speaker today, but the foundation is the issue. It's on a weak foundation. Whichever way you look at it, that House is divided.
Sadly so. And I can see Nancy Pelosi, grinning.
Well, the shoes she left behind is very large, and for him to feel, it's easy to criticize Pelosi then, left and right.
Now
that you're there, you see things.
We see how it goes. I mean, isn't it also interesting that the name of the former President Trump, keeps on, coming up here and there.
Unfortunately,
so much so that one even nominated, Trump to say, I'm nominating him to be this Speaker of the House.
It's going to be not so easy for him. It's like I said, it's easy to criticize, but criticizing objectively, not because you're on party lines and because you don't like the person's face or what have you. So he had to make a lot of promises, a lot of concessions, which means back to his constituent in California, whatever is expected of him, if he's not able to deliver at one point in time, we'll know that whatever concessions he might have made with them, or whatever deals he might have made with them, is speaking volumes for him to perform.
Absolutely. Yep. And as a Nigerian watching all this, it's rather intriguing, and it connects to Nigeria in a way, because if you look at the way and manner in which some of the speakers of the Nigerian House of Representatives have emerged, in recent years too, loads of drama, loads of politics. You remember when Aminu Tambuwa, had to other political parties, ACN, etc., had to support him, against his own party. If you look at the first term of Buhari, when Femi Gbajabiamila was being touted to be the Speaker, he didn't win. It was Dogara. Different things like that. Not quite in the manner that we've seen McCarthy emerge, but of course you also see that this is all about politics. And if politics is not fine, if it is not refined, this is what you will get.
And of course, the people are also actually watching, those who elected them into office. And I might say here that I think a lesson is learned I hope he learned one or two lessons because, because it's going to have an impact on his performance as Speaker of the House.
Definitely will. All right.
Back home here in Nigeria, where President Muhammadu Buhari within the week signed the 2023 appropriation bill of a total of 21.83 trillion naira into law, President Buhari used the medium to urge the National Assembly to reconsider its position on his proposal to securitize the federal government's outstanding Ways and Means balance at the Central Bank of Nigeria. He also asked the Minister of Finance to work with legislators to revisit some to the changes to that budget.
The 2023 budget that I have the honor of signing into law today provides for aggregate expenditures of 21.83 trillion naira, an increase of 1.32 trillion naira over the initial executive proposal for a total expenditure of 20.51 trillion naira. As is customary, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and the National Planner will subsequently provide more details of the approved budget and the supporting 2022 Finance Act. We have examined the changes made by the National Assembly to the 2023 Executive Budget Proposal. The amended fiscal framework for 2023, as approved by the National Assembly, shows additional revenues of 765.79 billion naira and an unfunded deficit of 553.46 billion naira. It is clear that National Assembly and the Executive need to capture some of the proposed additional revenue sources in the fiscal framework. This must be rectified. I have also noted that the National Assembly introduced new projects into the 2023 budget proposal, for which it has appropriated 770.72 billion naira. The National Assembly also increased the provisions made by ministries, departments, and agencies by 58.55 billion naira. Nonetheless, considering the imminent transition process to another democratically elected government, I decided to sign the 2023 appropriation bill into law as passed by the National Assembly to enable its implementation to commence without delay. I have, however, directed the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to engage with the legislature to revisit some of the changes made to the executive budget proposal, and it is my hope that you will receive cooperation in this regard from the National Assembly. I also urge the National Assembly to reconsider its position on my proposal to scrutinize the federal government's outstanding Ways and Means balance of the Central Bank of Nigeria. As I stated, the balance has accumulated over several years and represents funding provided by the CBN as lender of last resort to the government to enable it to meet obligations to lenders as well as cover budgetary shortfalls in projected revenues and or borrowing. I have no intention to fetter the right of the National Assembly to interrogate the composition of this balance, which can still be done even after granting the requested approval. Failure to grant the securitization approval will, however, cost the government about 1.8 trillion naira.
President Buhari there on Nigeria's 2023 budget. Meanwhile, the two arms of the National Assembly have reacted to the President's assent of the 2023 budget.
We haven't done as we would have wished to do, but I think at the risk of sounding immodest, the 9th National Assembly has passed the MTF FSP at a normal time, passed the appropriation bill, passed the finance bill, and of course we are very glad that we have been able to do that. Thirdly, this is the last annual appropriation bill that this National Assembly would pass and Mr. President would assent to, like he mentioned. It is our hope that implementation will start as soon as possible, because time is of essence, and the main reason for passing the budget at record time is to ensure implementation in good time. We have also increased the duration, the life of the 2022 Appropriation Act to end 31st of March. We believe that the simultaneous implementation of the 2022 Appropriation Bill, including the supplementary and of course the 2023 Appropriation Act, should be done in such a way that the economy of this country will be reflected before the next government comes in. Ours is for us to focus on the next 5 months or so. We still have something worthwhile to do, even though both chambers have done much or almost all of what we considered our legislative agenda. But Nigeria faces challenges of revenue, and this is going to be our focus. This is going to be what the National Assembly, both chambers, will ensure that we get revenues, we find more sources, better sources, stabilize the sources, and of course look into some of the legislations and some of the waivers and concessions granted to see whether or not they deserve to continue to be implemented in the way and manner they were approved, or we need to reverse them because we need money in our country. But that is not to say that we should raise taxes that will be out of the roof as to cause problem for our citizens. But I believe that as a National Assembly, in the next 5 months, we must be looking at the increasing the funds available to government, and also ensuring that deficit budget is minimized in the next Assembly by the grace of God.
Nigeria's Senate President Lawan there speaking on the 21.83 trillion naira budget, and of course, in his words, Steve, we haven't done as much as we should. It's like having a bit of reservation about the budget they assented to, or rather passed, as it were. And of course, critics all over have been having issues regarding the feasibility of implementing this budget, and to a large extent, it probably hasn't addressed the generality of the issues at hand.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to start with, Senate President Lawan, was just stating the obvious. If you recall, of course, that the president queried about 1.32 trillion, allegedly inserted by the National Assembly, into that huge budget of 21.83 trillion.
Can we regard that as pardon? Still, but the pardon saga in the old days. Well, it's recurrent. They still have to.
It will be pardon.
Yeah.
And then for the president to have queried it, I mean, it should, and it's not new. This is something that the National Assembly tends to do every time. The budget goes to you, and then it comes back heavier, pregnant. Is it for the good of the country? That's not something that we can talk about. But on the whole, what is the essence of this budget, really, at more than 21 trillion naira?
Indeed.
More than what we had last year. And that will require a clinical evaluation of the past, let's say 4, if not 5 or 6 years of the Buhari administration. This, by the way, will be the last for the president and for this, assembly. But we are talking about, the figures are not very soothing. They are not very reassuring to Nigerians. 21.8 trillion naira, but then we are talking about an overall budget deficit of 11.34 trillion. deficit, essentially, as you know, will be financed mainly by borrowings, which means that out of all the figures that we're talking about, 7 trillion will have to be borrowed. Again, 7 trillion.
And it's one thing to borrow, but how about servicing your debt?
How much we're borrowing is even more than what we have budgeted for capital expenditure, which is at 6.46 trillion. What are we expecting in terms of revenue? 10.49 trillion. Government enterprises is expected to bring about 3.87 trillion. Federal government oil revenue, just about paltry 2.2 trillion, and non-oil taxes about 2.43 trillion, and other revenues 2.62, 762 billion. It means 22% of oil-related revenue. That oil-related revenue will give us about 22% of what we're expecting, and then 78% from non-oil revenue. Put all this together, we're not even sure that the budget, the expectations will perform at up to 60 or 70%. So the deficit is scary.
It is scary.
We will borrow more than we will make. And I'm not so sure if that's a good note on which a government that promised change will be leaving Nigerians after 8 years.
So apart from borrowing, and there's the issue, just like we were discussing before we came on, the issue of recurrent expenditure, the cost of running governance itself, not just by the executive, but by the National Assembly and other arms of government as well. So if you take so much of this away, what is left for infrastructural development at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
So
what is left for capital is even lower than what you have to borrow, and lower than what you have to use in paying your debt.
But why do we have to go through this vicious cycle of annual ritual, if I may call it, of budget deficit?
If you listen to a few key knowledgeable members of the Buhari cabinet, you come away with the fact that yes, this might look gloomy, but our major problem is the fact that we have a revenue challenge. And that the debt, in terms of debt to GDP ratio, it is not so bad that we can't deal with it. I mean, the government is still able to borrow.
If I may say something here, I've had analysts talk about, there's nothing wrong in borrowing, but it's one thing to borrow, but what about servicing those debts? What you borrow, are you accumulating those debts till another government takes over?
We're servicing the debts actually, but then it's like a circus. You are not able to get out. And they are saying their argument will be that if we make more money, we'll be able to come out of it and neatly. If we cut down on some waste, and subsidy regime will be part of such waste, for example, which will be up to 6, if not more than 6 trillion, and that will be a sizable amount, that you can save from. But then you have to balance it with the sort of
balancing effect. Is the word. Leveraging on that balance is the word. If you're trying to save money and at the same time you're still running that high cost of governance, you haven't done anything here.
You really haven't.
So it's still a vicious cycle and a quagmire we need to
run away from
get
the
out.
Revenue challenge. No matter what, the revenue is low. For a 200 million country, it's low.
Indeed.
And it can deal with the humongous requirement that we have in terms of capital development, and we spend as if we have much more than we do. We don't. And it does not reflect in government.
It doesn't.
Well, we move on. Meanwhile, cash withdrawals from all government accounts have been banned from March 1st, 2023. The Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit says any withdrawals made after the policy commencement will attract money laundering and corruption investigations. Ferdinand Duroa reports.
According to the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, statistics show that within the period 2015 to 2022, the federal government withdrew 225.7 billion naira cash. State governments withdrew 701.5 billion naira cash, and local governments 156.7 billion naira cash. The financial regulatory body says most cash withdrawals were from public accounts at in excess of 5 million naira and 10 million naira. These directly contravene the provisions of the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022 and the Proceeds of Crime Recovery and Management Act 2022, which provide the legal framework setting limitations on cash transactions and sanctions for infringement of the provisions. The NFIU says the heavy withdrawals of cash from public accounts are mostly used for payment of ESTA codes and overseas travel allowances, two major causes of inflation and changes in the economy. The new policy is expected to reduce cash withdrawal by at least 1 trillion naira out of the 3 trillion naira circulated on a weekly basis.
This is for the protection of the system, for the protection of the public servants and the chief accounting officers of state, and for the protection of the elected public officials who are running the finances. There is no option to that. So what we advise in the guidelines is that they should make a recourse to technology, and then also as the law requested. And they should also make recourse to training.
The NFIU also highlights the conditions under which a waiver can be given.
The limitation is that, one, even if there are special needs to withdraw cash from any public account anywhere, that will have to get a presidential approval. That's number one. Number two, there is no standing waiver to say that because I'm doing this particular work, I have a standing waiver that anytime, because of my work, I can go to a bank and withdraw cash from a government account. The waiver is going to be by the president himself. It is going to be on case-by-case basis.
The NFIU says although the guideline is meant to enforce discontinuation of cash withdrawal from public accounts and mitigate expenditure, it also aims to support law enforcement and entire criminal justice system by strengthening transparency in investigation. However, there are those who fear that the new guidelines may run contrary to the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. They base their argument on the ground that the Nigerian Federal Constitution has imbued the federating states with a sought financial independence, that once the federal government allocates money from the federation post to the state governments, the federal government lacks the constitutional powers to breathe down the orders on the states and the local governments on how such money should be spent, as if the state and local governments are appendages of the former. Ferdinand Duroha, Arise News.
All right, cashless, from March 1st. I think it's important to highlight the objective of this policies, mainly on government expenditure. I think the agencies regarding that, so probably doesn't permeate to the general public.
Well, I mean, the focus of what NFIU is doing is to target the malfeasance that you have, within the government. It's a brilliant, not new. You can call it a reform, though. But it's a brilliant intervention along the line of the cashless policy of the CBN. So what the NFIU is basically saying is that we have the instrumentality of the law, to make this happen. And the figures are scary, scary to the point of obscenity.
Looking at
absolutely. Look at the amount of cash over time between 2015 and 2022 that the federal government and the states are withdrawing. And they stated clearly what they were using the money for. Essentially, ESTA codes, things that do not even help the Nigerian economy at the end of the day. Because what you're doing is you're drawing that money to chase dollar that you go and spend, abroad, a good chunk of it. What is it about our fascination with cash? What is it about our dependence, over-dependence, on mints, on cash? It's worrisome, and I think that NFIU should proceed with what they have said. March the 1st, that will come on the heels of the redesign of the Naira and the fact that, you just cash can't just be flying about, given what CBN said, that 85% of our cash is out of the vault of the CBN.
It also encourages inflation as part of the argument. And Steve, I was just wondering, yes, you said it's not new, but what happened to the single treasury account initiative borne by this government when they first came in, that look, all manner of expenditure coming in or being spent by government agencies or states or what have you, they can easily track them.
That's still in place.
That's still in place.
That's why NFIU is able to track the fact that yes, money is coming into Treasury single account, but then a good chunk of it have been taken out by cash. They're not saying that they're not being spent judiciously, but they're saying that while you're taking them out in cash, it's a different ball game for the EFCC or ICPC to deal with the propriety of the spending. But in terms of the fact that this is you're dealing in cash, that's what the NFIU is against. And I applaud it. You can't continue in that manner. This, as a matter of fact, ought to have come at the beginning of the Buhari administration. But then, March 1st is almost here. Let's see what happens.
We'll see what happens, indeed. Now, in other news, the former Federal Commissioner for Information and South-South leader, Chief Edwin Clark, has endorsed the presidential candidate of Labour Party, Peter Obi, as his candidate for next month's presidential election. Clark said that Obi, as president, will unite the country with his move to restructure the country. According to the elder statesman, one who must be the next president of Nigeria must be educated and experienced, just as he said that the southeast of the country should be allowed to produce the next president because the zone has the necessary human capacity to provide leadership for the country. Finally, on the week that was, Pope Francis has presided over the funeral of his predecessor, Benedict XVI, at the Vatican in front of tens of thousands of packed people into St. Peter's Square and to a global television audience. Benedict became the first pontiff in 6 centuries to resign, citing ill health. So history has been made because it's the first time a sit-in pope has ever conducted a funeral for another. All right, Pope Benedict XVI, I think some of the argument was that during his reign, albeit short due to ill health, has been the fact that he wasn't able to, or rather the issues of the molestations by Catholic priests on underaged faithfuls, as it were, the issues of harassment, exploitations, and what have you, and reparations from victims.
That's right.
It came to the fore, and it was such a big issue then. Although he tried, using reforms of whatever, and of course, it's still being borne by the current pontiff, Pope Francis. Maybe he could have done better, but at least he tried.
Well, I mean, we spoke extensively about Pope Benedict, last week. He has done his best, and then he pulled out at a time that he felt that he could physically, not be able to carry on again. But I think that the import of this story is about the fact that he has finally been laid to rest. And for the first time, we are witnessing a sitting pope, conducting funeral rites on another pope, which is a first. So, what can we say other than to say that he has done his best?
Indeed.
He ran a good race, and I think that Christian faithful, especially those of the Catholic stock, will at least remember that Pope Benedict, passed through this earthly lane and he gave the race his best shot.
Indeed, indeed he did.
And the other part, if only briefly, will be the gale of endorsements for Peter Obi. The latest, of course, being the other statesman, E.K. Clark. I think that this is the season, and we will get a lot more. All the other candidates too will one or two, have their own thing, but nobody should dismiss an endorsement as being worthless. Because if it was worthless, you wouldn't have sought an endorsement or, a consultation, with the same people who are giving the endorsement.
But at the end of the day, the electorate will still be the major decider, as it were.
It is their call and it is their time.
Indeed.
All right, then, that's all on the week that was.